Hey everybody, witches and warlocks and bears, oh my. And no, Dorothy, this is not Kansas. And if you grew up as part of the generation that always got a participation trophy because it was easier on your parents or your teachers than teaching you the important lesson in life that sometimes we're wrong, sometimes we lose, sometimes we don't have all the answers, and sometimes we can just do better, then you'll probably want to turn this program off right now and watch another rerun of The Craft or Bewitched on TV. Because today we're going to tackle the issue of personal, spiritual, and natural identity, learning to reconcile our unique paths with creating a safe space for future generations of practitioners and current generations of practitioners to discover who we really are. That's what this show is about. And so we're going to end our first season of The Masca and the Mystic on this note. And you're watching The Masca and the Mystic. This is Dr. John Michael Salvato. I'll see you on the other side with some special guests. And hello, everybody. As I said, I'm Dr. John Michael Salvato. With me today is my co-host, Andrea Savar, and Rosemary Archer, and Richard Levy. Many of you know all of us from previous shows. And so if you're watching for the first time, we welcome you. You're catching our season finale. So the good news is you will have an opportunity over the next 8 or 9 weeks to catch up on all of the past broadcasts, which will start in just 2 weeks on our Masca and the Mystic channel. We also encourage you to like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Do all of that, like, subscribe, click the little bell so you get notifications when a new show is out. We certainly appreciate that. That is actually how we keep the program running. All the contact information on how to catch the show is on the screen below. And guys, welcome. Thanks for helping make this this last show of the season, something that hopefully will not just be something to remember, but something that has a positive impact on our community.
Yes, thanks everybody for coming. I'm so excited to see everybody today. And so where should we get started?
Well, and let me apologize too for the mess in the background. I'm in the process of packing and moving, so the green screen is put away. That wasn't really not necessarily very well thought out, but you get to see that that even in the midst of chaos, we can take a few minutes to just sort of sharpen our focus. So if you're watching, this is an interactive program. Be sure to leave your comments or questions, and I'm going to go ahead and turn the comment section on so I can keep an eye on the screen. Let us know where you're watching from, so today's topic, guys, is this idea and where, I guess, a little background on where the topic came from. A lot of folks know that recently there was some drama that occurred because I dared to question a statement on another YouTube channel that said if you weren't initiated in the goddess tradition, in the Dianic cult, and if you don't worship Diana and Dianus by whatever names that particular group knows them, then you don't have any right, their exact words, you don't have the right to call yourself a witch. And so my challenge to them was let's look at the realistic fact that we didn't even find the Old English or Middle English word witche or witcha, which gets mispronounced as Wicca in the modern English. But we didn't even have that word until the Old English period. And language, the people who lived in Persia and in Israel and in Russia and in South America don't speak English. Not Old English, not Middle English, not New English. We all have our own languages. So we know that the first references to practitioners of magic can be found 3,700 years before the Common Era in the Code of Hammurabi. And language is dynamic. And so that made me think, and all of us that are here on the screen today have had conversations about the fact that, language, like labels and like identity, ought to be fluid, because the words that we used 100 years ago or 200 years ago, or in some cases last week, may not mean the same thing for us today. So let's use that as and we're not talking just about, whether you call yourself a witch or a warlock or a mage or a mystic or a Christopagan, but whether you call yourself a male, a female, genderqueer, non-binary, purple dude, whatever your identity is, like, let's use that as a starting point, and just kind of take it from there. Obviously, this isn't a scripted show, so we want to keep it that way.
Yeah, I think for me, like, I've always, like you said, contemplated the idea that, language is constantly evolving, and therefore our relationship to how we define things should also evolve in that same manner. And I've never necessarily felt comfortable calling myself a witch, because I always felt like that wasn't something that my family would have used. I've gotten more comfortable with it now, but of course it has kind of zero relationship to what any of the current movements are. It's just something that I've had to do on my own personal journey. And I really encourage people to think about what words kind of either make them uncomfortable and why. What words feel more like home and why. And just be in that state of constant flux and questioning, because that way everything stays in motion and movement, and you have such a beautiful relationship to the magic of the universe and the world in that particular way.
Right on. And I have to ask before we hear from Richard, is that your teepee in the background, or is
that's my daughter. I'm sorry. She just kind of set up camp in here. She's like, this room is awesome. So.
That's magnificent.
I absolutely love that. I noticed it behind you and I said, ooh, a teepee. I love it.
Look at me sitting in there, like, doing my notes,
I want to go in there now.
We started this conversation really last night in our class, and Andrea just said before we started, I absolutely loved something that you said last night. So I wonder your take on this as a starting point, and if you could end your take with the statement you made about our conversations, that would be awesome.
Me?
Richard.
Oh, sorry.
Are you here? Are you hearing me, Richard?
Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hard to tell.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So, I suppose. Wonderful. I suppose the thing about language in general is it's meant to be about communication. It's not. One of the things that I think we tend to do is we think it's all about definition, and it should be more about description than definition. In my favorite philosophers was Ludwig Wittgenstein, that he described language as being a city that changes and evolves, as we see all the time. And I kind of think that's how we need to see it. And we see this also with other things. We see it within the LGBT community, particularly. We are where we don't want to necessarily be defined by a label, but described by a word and identified with a word. And it's the same here. The point of language isn't just to talk at people, it's to talk with people.
to break up. Richard, I think we're starting to lose you. You're starting to break up. So we'll give Richard a chance to maybe Richard jump out and jump back in because you've frozen entirely. And Rosemary, tell us a little bit about your perspective, and I'm going to jump off the screen so that I can troubleshoot the connection as well.
Okay.
So Andrea, pick it up if I'm still not back yet.
So the thing that came into my mind with the words of Juliet, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. And I appreciated Wicca because I'm of that generation that I'm sure many of you are, where we were cut from our heritage when we came to America. And I fall into that category where I wasn't as fortunate as people that had never completely broken the ways that we had. And then we actually had a generation before me, my mother's generation, that are in complete denial of the ways. And I have an appreciation for Wicca, which I've learned is witchy is the right way of saying it. And I was immediately called there because I was being called by my ancestors to go somewhere. And that was the only thing I could find on any kind of witchcraft that I felt comfortable with was Wicca. And I have an appreciation for it for that reason. That was kind of like a starting point for the occult. And it was very light and it was very bright, and I didn't feel frightened of it. So I'll always have an appreciation for Wicca. But that was kind of a springboard for me to get into other things and to understand and realize that the best initiation, I hear people saying, oh, you have to be initiated. And those are always things I couldn't afford as a queer, disabled person. I couldn't afford those things. I couldn't afford the initiations that were just, so I didn't find them accessible. And what I did learn in Wicca, some of it resonated with me. Like I said, it was a good springboard, but it didn't resonate in here because I knew, and the reason why I was attracted to it is because I knew in here that my grandmother and her sisters were special. I knew that my aunts were special. I knew that even some of my uncles were special. They were mystics. And I just didn't know how. So, so that's I guess that's my take on it. But, and the initiation for many of us is not going to come from a piece of paper that you're going to get. Understand this. The initiation, I can share this, is life. La vida. That's the initiation. It's the hard things you go through. You're not going to get a piece of paper saying, oh, I'm this and that. No offense. You have to go through it. It's hard. It's hard work, but that's the way. It's not an easy path. It's not, you can't click your heels like Dorothy. Although some of us might love to get out of a situation and go into that teepee that Andrea has a lot of the time, but it's a beautiful, torturous awakening. That's the way I can describe it. And depending on my queerness, sometimes I feel more male, sometimes I feel more female, like, woman, I wear beautiful dresses and big earrings. Other times I'll wear this. I'll wear a tie, and I feel very comfortable with this. So as long as it's colorful, because I have to have color. But it's the same thing kind of like with this path. Like, some days I feel more witch because I feel more like, oh yeah, that's what you called my great grandmother. Yes, I'm taking that word back. And then other times I just feel like a MAGA, which really pisses me off. About MAGA really pisses me off because I know that that's our word that I also need to reclaim for myself. And sometimes I'll just feel like, the English word mystic. Other times I'll feel like a human. I'm not always in these states where I feel like I'm up riding on my broomstick either. You have to become grounded every once in a while, and I'll feel like a student, or I'll feel like a cook. It depends on that moment, and just that understand that the fluidity of life and the spirit, it's fluidity, and it's okay. Sometimes you could be the biggest femme on the planet, and sometimes you want to go outside and you want to kick up the leaves and roll around. Ooh, but that's a male thing. And I really wish we would stop gendering like everything. I mean, everything gets gendered now, and I find it absurd.
You're wearing a tie and a babushka on the same screen, because you can, and you should be. Everyone should be able to do that. And when we had, I think of one of our previous guests, Shaheen Nero, who was able to be masculine and feminine at the same time, where he could bring who he is. And so it was no surprise to me that our guests responded really, really well to that, because it created a safe space for them to be able to be who they are. When we see, we have this awesome responsibility, and names and titles and initiations, for me, are nothing more than a bookmark of what you accomplished on that day. The next day, you're completely different than you were the day that you got initiated. And it has nothing to do with the initiation, but it has everything to do with the initiation. So, the next day is its own initiation, and what happens in that day is our next initiation. And the drama that happened yesterday was our initiation, if we let it be, to the person that we are today. So thank you for bringing that. Richard, let's go back to you, because I know we had some trouble hearing and understanding you. And then Andrea and Rosemary, when Richard speaks, because in the UK there is a different kind of internet. I'm not technical enough to know the real words for it, but like I consider it like a stream.
Should I mute?
Here it goes back and forth. Just mute your microphone, and it should help. It should really help Richard a lot. And I'm going to do the same thing.
Okay, so I think this might be working now. I'll just carry on, and no doubt someone will interrupt if not. But I don't know what was able to come through when I last spoke, but essentially, I think the important part of language is conversation. It's ongoing. Language is there to describe, not to define. When we are and I think what our responsibility is being online now, particularly because now we're using words, and it's a written word. Facebook and these platforms are not necessarily the best place for some of the conversations we're trying to have, but we're making an effort, and the effort requires, if someone comes in and says something that they are, it could be something that sounds completely ridiculous to us, but we have to hear them out. They certainly, if they're going to start using it, might be challenged and they need to elaborate, but it's not about ridiculing people, it's asking what they mean by that. So if they're using terms like mage, whatever, it doesn't matter. That's a perfectly valid term, obviously. But what do they mean by that? Could mean something else, someone else using the same term. When it comes to what you said about initiation, though, that is, to me, the reason that is really frustrating is because the very early initiatory traditions here, and when I say very early, I don't mean that, I mean like modern Wicca, for example. The founders of modern Wicca didn't feel that way. It has become a thing, which really astounds me, because even Doreen Valiente very famously said, a witch is a witch. Like, she really did not think initiation is how you're into a specific tradition. It is not the entirety of being a witch. So it's really, to me at least, that comes from nothing more than arrogance and title. I can't see how it could be anything else. If someone genuinely believes that only someone using the term in a very specific modern context is allowed to use it, that is entitlement. I don't see what else that could be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought that up with Doreen Valiente. And for those who don't know, Richard is very closely involved with the Doreen Valiente Foundation. And if you don't know who Doreen Valiente is, we can have that conversation at another time. But certainly one of the most formative people in the modern witchcraft movement, who unfortunately I think gets a lot less credit than some of the more vocal and manipulative males who were involved in that movement. We don't think of Doreen Valiente, we don't think of Sybil Leek, we don't think of the women who were really driving that. We hear the loud, boisterous men who created the most clever origin stories. But that's a really good point. And I see that happening in our language today. Like you said, Richard, that's a thing right now, where this sort of exclusivity and fundamentalism around initiatory traditions is happening, and we're even seeing it in our tradition in hereditary magic. You hear people who've really become turned off by the term hereditary witch, because in the present age, most of the people who use that term use it to try and say, oh, well, because I was born into a family of witches, I therefore have more power, or I therefore have more greater gifts or greater skills. And any of us who are actually born into family practices, I mean, hereditary magic usually simply means you come from a folk magic tradition and you didn't you didn't get any benefits. If anything, it might have been a little harder for you because you started earlier and you weren't really as developed. And any skill that you have today is because you worked for it. It didn't come from your blood. The debate about whether you're born a witch or not, you may be born with that inclination toward a magical path and a magical practice, but you're not born with any skills and any gifts that nobody else has. So thank you for that. I think that's important. Andrea, coming from a hereditary practice.
Well, and I actually have always thought that everybody is born with a lot of those predispositions already in place. And then I think the only kind of leg up we get is if you start a little earlier, knowing that those things are okay, and not having it kind of beaten out of you and, the figurative sense. So I actually think that all humans have that ability to certain psychic abilities, but as of course, all of it becomes a practice, and the way that you work at it every single day is how you hone it. And which is one of the reasons I love, books like Matt Oren's book, Psychic Witch, because he's super clear about the fact that he's like, yeah, I came to witchcraft because I loved The Craft the movie The Craft when I was a teenager, and it sparked something in me. And so he doesn't try to over sanctify anything, but he does show how practice and being very open and being fluid about your definitions is really important. So I really, and even, honestly, even those that we've mentioned, just who have a much more rigid thought process when it comes to the beliefs and initiation, I still find pearls of wisdom there too. So I think for me, I'm much more curious about everyone's perceptions and more interested in having the conversations that challenge them, than I am at just shutting it all down and being like, this is black, this is white, this is how we do things, and boom, end of discussion. So I think I'm more curious about how other people are relating to how they perceive magic in the daily.
So that's a great jumping off point, Rosemary. What has, since this is our season finale and we're at roughly the first half of that last show, this has been a journey that we've taken. Andrea and I didn't set out to become superstars or internet celebrities, and it's a good thing because that's not what we became. But I think, what happened is, we originally set out to just sort of share information and introduce people to some relevant voices. And what's grown out of that has been this incredible community, at the height of which is the community that's involved with the class. What have been your experiences in this past, 6 months, 8 months, whatever, in hearing some of those diverse voices and finding, has that been helpful at all for you in finding your way?
It actually really has, because once you see, because I was raised Roman Catholic, and I thought the Virgin Mary, that was it. And I loved her because to me, she was the goddess. And then when I went into Wicca, I realized, okay, she's the goddess. And then with the other voices in the class, what they did is they introduced me to other aspects of that same energy of the divine feminine. And that's what makes it so beautiful. And that's why fundamentalism, what I just described before about my family's initiation, I think that might resonate with some people, but that's my family. That's in our family. That doesn't have anything to do with anyone else. And it's the same type of thing here, where we can approach the same exact energies in our own ways. And that's my biggest, greatest takeaway from the class, and just knowing how important it is to connect with the ancestors as well, who are just they're so fundamentally important. And so many of us really admire Native American spirituality because of their connection to the ancestors. We can all have that because we all have ancestors. And I never thought of it that way before. I said, well, that's, that's a Native American thing, and I don't want to appropriate that. But we all have the same thing, and it's so mind opening and so beautiful, where you see everyone loving that same energy, like the Virgin Mary, for example, right? Loving that same energy, and they come at it in a completely different way, and sometimes just the energy itself, and it just makes me realize how powerful that really is. So that's like my greatest, and to know that I'm part of a community of people that are not going to send me away with breadcrumbs because I'm unworthy somehow, or I can't afford your class, I can't afford a psychic reading and counseling for like $500 an hour. I can't afford it. It's not accessible. And it's just so wonderful to be part of a community where we may not always agree with each other, but it's okay that we don't, because we're like a family. Families don't always agree with each other either. So that's my greatest gift that I've had from taking your class. And Andrea and Richard, everything, like, there's been so many wonderful teachers that have risen out of this also. So that I appreciate all of you for that reason. So that's my takeaway from all of it.
Thank you. Well, and thank you, because it's the success of any teacher or any show or any interviewer. I think Andrea would probably agree is in the guest. It's in the student. It's in the participation that you bring, and you bring that every single week. And I appreciate that. I know Zia Angelina appreciates it too from election night. That was also delightful. Richard, I wanted to ask you a slightly different version of the same question, because so much of what you've brought in value in this last season, and even in our previous incarnation of the show, in the Brew, which will be coming back on the in-between weeks, by the way, in the new year, I believe, you really have probably one of the greatest grasps of anybody that I know in the modern era, on the importance of narrative, the place of narrative, and really how that helps us to find meaning in our own lives. So, with the broad scope of this topic, if you wouldn't mind kind of speaking to that, because you just heard Rosemary talking about the Blessed Virgin Mary, and both Rosemary and I share with you also that connection to the Jewish tradition in our ancestry, and so we could really distill that down even further and disembody it to lost Richard. He'll be back. Shoot, that was going to be a good question. Damn it! I was going to ask him to talk about Shekinah. Here he comes. Okay, waiting for his video footage. Meanwhile, guys, if you're watching, go ahead and feel free to ask any questions. And welcome back, Richard. So I was just going to say, I was like, damn it, that was going to be a good question. If we distill the narratives and the stories and legends and mythos back far enough, we can come to the sort of the disembodied, form of the Great Mother, Shekinah, so talk a little bit, if you would, about that place that narrative plays. I think that was Richard's first appearance on my show. He talked about narrative.
Okay, so it's interesting when we talk about narrative, I guess, because of course the entire land and things really appeals to me, particularly when we're talking about witchcraft. I think, other than Egypt, which obviously used hieroglyphics and later maybe demotic, but that was a lot later, you can always see that there is a distinct term that gets translated as witchcraft. And I think I think that is what is important, is this distinction. I like that word more than difference. I think distinction's a better term. And when you look at witches in maybe say classical mythology, you obviously got the most famous ones being maybe Circe and Medea, who are described very similarly and are related as well. But of course, the interesting thing is when you go to a classical text like Argonautica, so that's Jason the Argonauts, they're traveling, they're on a voyage, and on their voyage, lots of magic going on of different kinds. Oracular magic and necromancy and all sorts of stuff going on. And then they get towards Colchis, where Medea lives. And then the magic becomes the magic that is witchcraft. And I find it very interesting, because when we look at these ideas, we can identify with them. You identify that often through the language and the character. And the distinction is there in the language. So you'll have, so in ancient Greeks, you have there was a very ancient word which would actually become the medieval goetia of goen, which means wizard, which would then become magos. Even in ancient Greek, that kind of lost that word. And of course, the word for witch being pharmakes. So you have these distinct words for a reason there. And it's something that I'm always interested in. I wouldn't say people are obliged to do that, but to me, the idea of a witch isn't just someone who practices magic. There's different types of magical practitioner. It's a very specific term, but some people might disagree with that, and I'm happy to be open to that. I'm not trying to tell them what they can and can't identify. It's just I would like to understand what identify with it and what's going on. And in our the richness of our mythology, of course, witch is a reclaimed word. Obviously, you know, it is something that we've had to claim back, because although, as we mentioned, the Saxon of witcher and witchy was used as potentially a positive term in the Anglo-Saxon language, in the modern English language, which was, generally speaking, obviously a negative term. And we've reclaimed that, and we've reclaimed that for many reasons, including the marginalised element, the sexism element, various things. So I find it quite alarming when people identifying as witches then shudder at the term warlock or any of these other terms, when actually just listen to what people mean by that and understand it first. And you go, oh, okay, you are identifying it for that reason, awesome. Even if that reason was, I was totally inspired, say, by, I don't know, Bewitched or something. If that was your inspiration, you're entitled to that inspiration. I might find it a bit bizarre, but you're entitled to be inspired by what you're inspired by. It's then your functions that will matter. Are you an armchair? You just sit in an armchair reading books, or are you actually practicing? Do you do the work? The title, if you're going to get hung up on a title, you're really missing the point of what it's about, I suppose.
Yeah, I see you nodding your head. Go ahead and jump in.
Yes, I completely agree. Especially yes, I think when we get caught up in titles in general, we just limit ourselves in so many different ways. And, you know, it was a while back, I think Richard actually wrote something quite lovely about, and I think it was a reflection from when you were 17, if I'm right. It was on the Mosca and the Mystic page, if anybody wants to go over there, and just on our Facebook page, check it out. But there were these different iterations of which can mean to different people, and how, you know, I think for me, one of the reasons that I am warming up a little more to the word for myself is because of my relationship with working with plants and healing work with plants, and the different just the different things that I do with that particular part of one of the aspects that we often associate with witchcraft. But anyway, there was, yes, this whole beautiful kind of cosmos of what being a witch can really look like for each different person. So I really appreciate that.
And you share with everybody, if you don't mind. I think you'll remember this conversation when we were transitioning from the brew to our show. Why we ended up with this title for the show.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was one of the ones that's perfect. It was sort of, well, who's the Mosca and who's the mystic? Like, do we? And we're kind of a bit of both in many ways. And there is that fluidity where I think a lot of people were kind of wondering, well, is Andrea the mystic, or is it Jean-Michael, or what, you know, what's happening here? Well, it's both. And we deliberately chose not to use the word witch, I think at that particular moment, because we decided Mosca was probably a better fit for some of the things that come out of our particular tradition that we share. So it was, yeah, there's a fluidity there too.
I agree, and you know, from this point forward, guys, we're not getting any comments. I'm hoping that we are actually broadcasting live. If we're not, we'll broadcast after the fact. But I thought that a great way to kind of round out our show with this in the United States, and I'm sure, I don't ever remember when Canada actually celebrates Thanksgiving. It's either right before or right after us, and they may.
It's before, yeah.
Actually, another guest of the show, Terry Karanen, Dr. Terry Karanen says we are broadcasting. That's awesome. I would love to hear and maybe round out the show with what we are grateful for. And I'll go last, and we'll go ahead and start with Rosemary, and then go to Richard, and then Andrea. Rosemary, you're still muted. Hang on, let me unmute you. Oh, it's not letting me unmute you.
Okay.
There you go.
I'm grateful for just all the growth of this year. There's been a lot of growth. There's been a lot of sadness, but there's been that balance at the same time of growth. And I think that that's what I'm most grateful for, is through all the hardships. There's also been a lot of positivity going, for the future. And that's definitely the thing I'm the most grateful for. And I'm grateful for everyone that I've met this year has just been amazing, and I feel like I've finally, like I'm almost home kind of thing with my tribe. And I'm very happy about that. So that's what I'm grateful for this year.
On. Richard. Richard.
I feel I just want to actually say that I feel people are naturally called to witchcraft, but we make ourselves witches. It's not down to someone else to make us witches. We make ourselves witches, and that's where we put in the work to be a witch. But I think there's a natural call to it, but we make ourselves witches. And that, to me, has always been a really important marker of the journey. And we learn from everyone we come across, every child, every man, every woman, every non-binary, every single person we meet, good or bad, in life experience. It comes from life experience, which really comes from that. And it's because of that, because we know our stories, because we learn about ourselves and we experience life. It's there for us. It's not about a book. It's about life, and it's just there. So we initiate you to that term. It's a word term that you have earned for yourself. If you get initiated as well, that's fine. If you are in another tradition, that's fine. Doesn't require it, but you can do it in a myriad of ways. It's all fine.
Andrea.
Yes. I just, for me, I'm grateful for so many things right now. I am grateful for this community and for this possibility to be able to have these conversations. I've been very quiet about my family tradition on both sides, just because it's been that hidden in plain sight has always been more of our way of working. So I'm grateful to have a platform to speak a little bit and hopefully, share some knowledge. And I think also I'm deeply grateful for the way the natural world has been such a place of healing and solace in these very strange times. So I'm very grateful for that. And then I happened upon a quote recently, and it's something I read in school, but it kind of came back with more importance now, I think. Which kind of goes back to this idea of a continual conversation and continued learning. But it is, wonder is the beginning of wisdom by Socrates. And I feel like that's something that if we really try to maintain our wonder, our wonderment, our appreciation and mystification with everything that is happening around us in this constant movement, it leads us on little paths to wisdom. And we don't have to have all the answers right now. And I would kind of mistrust anyone who actually says they do have all the answers. It is a progress made personally by each person on a daily basis. So I would just say for the weeks to come, when things especially in the United States and around the world, are becoming quite dire in the pandemic, I would just say, please find your wonder in the little things.
Absolutely, well said. And I want to first note that Kristen asked if there was a glossary of terms that people can find out the fit that's best for them. I would say that we can find that sort of information probably best nowadays on the internet, just typing in other words for witch or other words for practitioners of magic, because every culture is going to have a slightly different set of terms that they use. In Italy alone, we have more than 21 different terms for different types of practitioners of magic. And not all of them mean witch. Mosca is one example. And then Terry says to Andrea, childlike wonderment of life. And I think that is probably one of the things I'm the most grateful for, as many know watching the show. This year started out with my ending up in the hospital twice with COVID. One infection, but two different times. The second time almost being my last. And so that's one of the reasons why we only had 9 episodes this season, is I decided I was going to take it easier this year and only do a show every other week. So I'm grateful, first of all, so grateful for Andrea for partnering with me in this venture. I'm grateful for everyone who's watched and who's been a guest on the show. But I think more than anything else, what I'm really grateful for is that we started this show as an opportunity to introduce people to other voices, to give them an opportunity to meet some other practitioners, hoping that it would just inspire you on your own journeys and inspire us in our own practice. And what has come out of that has been even greater than I could have imagined or dreamed. It was scary for me as a practitioner of our particular path to make the decision to be an oath breaker, a warlock, literally, and begin teaching outside of our family, which we don't do until we're 50. And from the time I was 50 until 57, struggled with, okay, are you really willing to commit? Because once you make that commitment, there's no turning back to teaching these things publicly. And this year has taught me that it was the right decision for me. Not that anybody else needs to buy into that. Certainly members of my family, some of the members of my family have disagreed with that. Some have supported that. But it let me know that the fruits of this work, which is what I use to let myself know, because we can delude ourselves into thinking it was a smart idea or a bad idea. But by the fruits is how we know what an effort produced. And the fruits of this show and the fruits of these efforts have been a community that, as Rosemary said, we don't always agree with one another. Sometimes we even have fights. And sometimes when you have a fight, somebody in the family will say, F you, I'm out of here. I'm taking my marbles and going home. And when they're ready, they come back, because we're family. And the old Italian expression that blood is thicker than water, applies metaphysically here too. We are a tribe. And sometimes tribe members may get pissed off and go in the forest for a while and take a couple deep breaths and find their balance and know that they will always have a home in this tribe. And so that goes to those who've, who may be taking a break right now. That goes to those who've taken a break a while back, all the way back to the very first shows of The Brew. That there will always be a place in my heart for you guys, and that I will always be grateful for each and every person who crossed my path in life, but especially who crossed my path in this incredible medium. It's giving us an opportunity to say, if somebody told you you don't get to call yourself a witch or a magical practitioner or whatever, you have a place here. And so if we have to be the island of misfit toys and magical practitioners, then so be it. I'm totally happy being part of that community. And so thank you to each and every one of you. For those who are celebrating Thanksgiving sometime between October and January, whatever your period of gratitude is, I wish you happiness, and I encourage you in the midst of this pandemic, really think about gathering in smaller numbers this year so that next year everybody has a place at that table. So God, I shouldn't have even gotten emotional over that, but my heart is just like super full right now, and I really have to pee. So thank you, everybody. It's good to see you, and I'm gonna go ahead and close the show out this time with our message from the Charter for Compassion, and hope that this, if you are gathering in bigger groups, that means there's a greater chance for that uncle who, unlike Rosemary's MAGA, which means mage, is the other kind of MAGA, which isn't so good. So maybe we can use this as an inspiration on how to get through the holidays. I love you guys, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
The principle of compassion lies at the heart of all religious, ethical, and spiritual traditions,
calling us always to treat all others as we wish to be treated ourselves.
Compassion impels us to work tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of our fellow creatures.
To dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and put another there.
To honor the inviolable sanctity of every single human being.
Treating everybody without exception.
With absolute justice, equity, and respect.
It is also necessary in both public and private life
to refrain consistently and empathically from inflicting pain.
To act or speak violently out of spite, chauvinism, or self-interest.
To impoverish, exploit, or deny basic rights to anybody.
And to incite hatred by denigrating others, even our enemies.
Is a denial of our common humanity.
We acknowledge that we have failed to live compassionately.
And that some have even increased the sum of human misery in the name of religion.
We therefore call upon all men and women
to restore compassion
to the center of morality and religion.
To return to the ancient principle
that any interpretation of scripture
that breeds violence,
hatred,
or disdain
is illegitimate.
To ensure that youth are given accurate and respectful information
about other traditions, religions, and cultures.
To encourage a positive appreciation of cultural and religious diversity.
To cultivate
an informed empathy
with the suffering of all human beings,
even those
regarded as enemies.
We urgently need to make compassion a clear, luminous, and dynamic force in our polarized world.
Rooted in a principled determination to transcend selfishness.
Compassion can break down political, dogmatic, ideological, and religious boundaries.
Born of our deep interdependence, compassion is essential for human relationships and to a fulfilled humanity.
It is the path to enlightenment and indispensable in the creation of a just economy and a peaceful global community.